Thank you so much. That was great. Wow, man, there's a lot to think about today. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. All right, we're really in the home stretch. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to gaze into the crystal ball a little bit and see kind of what does the future of security look like. And there's nobody better to do that than the founder and the visionary behind Vera. He's already on his second startup company. He always thinks about this stuff way out in advance before it really hits the mainstream. Prakash Linga is a PhD from Cornell University in computer science. Really smart guy. I'm really looking forward to his chat about the future of security. Come on up here. All right, cool.
Thank you, Robin.
It's all you.
Thank you all for being part of Versus, right? As Robin said, I love pontificating, so this is definitely what I do best, right? So, see the slides moving too much here. Right. All right, there you go. So today's conversation touched on a few key themes, right? So we talked about how security is a people problem. It's all about aligning incentives to mitigate risk. We also talked about how encryption is a very valuable tool, right? And we talked about how national security does not have to be at odds with protecting individual privacy. We also commented on how there's no safe zone anymore, right? Data is everywhere, right? In different form factors at an unprecedented scale, right? And in this new normal, any approaches that secure data wherever it travels is the best way forward. So now, why do we see so many security hacks? So why is security in the news all the time, right? Many reasons, but the primary one is security continues to remain an afterthought, right? So just think about some simple example, right? The internet, right? So it was built to connect a few machines long ago. Today, it's the backbone of everything and anything that we do, right? But security came somewhere along the way. And we, to this date, are facing some of the challenges there, right? And I'm an entrepreneur, right? And I've built a few companies, right? So anytime you think about building any new product, right? You optimize for the minimum viable product, right? You don't think about security. It usually comes much later, right? And also as an entrepreneur, one of the things I've learned is you can't easily bolt things on top, right? You couldn't change the engine while an aircraft is in flight, not easily. It's very difficult. Same thing with security. Right? If it comes in many years later, right, not something you can do well. That's fundamentally the challenge that we're facing. So the other big challenge is the change in threat landscape. We talked a lot about confidentiality, talked about how data loss and data theft is everywhere these days, right? The Sony hack, Snowden, plenty of examples, right? We also see some attacks, distributed denial of service attacks around availability. Right? So the Dyn DNS attack from last month is the most recent, right? But we're also seeing a small number of very interesting attacks, which we summarize as data integrity attacks, right? Where the idea is that somebody, who has access to information would modify maybe a small amount of information, right? But that goes undetected, unnoticed. And now you as the user are making future decisions on imperfect data, untrusted data, right? Now that's scary and that's new, right? So imagine I'm the FBI director, right? I'm making life and death decisions every day, every minute, every second, in fact. And even if in a small way, I distrust the information that I have and I don't have the confidence in the decisions I'm making, right? That's a big problem, right? So that's what we're starting to see. And that's what we would see a lot more of in the next decade. So it's not just the magnitude of threats, it's also the nature of threats that's going to change, right? It's about these subtle integrity attacks that go unnoticed, right? For a long time, sometimes many months, many years, right? And the damage is done, right? So the way to think about it is confidentiality is people get access to your information, so information generated in the past. Availability is affecting sort of systems, availability of critical systems now, today, right? And integrity is something that's lurking there and is potentially affecting future actions, right? So that's sort of the nature of threats that we would likely see shifting, right? So the other interesting aspect, right? So it's a story from I think yesterday, right? Uber cab driver was curious about our conference versus security, right? And obviously heard everything about the most recent presidential election, the DNC email hack, and he was genuinely concerned and scared about the DNC having the resources that they have, not able to protect themselves from an email hack, right? What would he, as an individual user who has no idea what security is and why is it even important, right? So how does that impact him, right? Does somebody always have access to his phone, right? So those are the kinds of questions that are lurking on everybody's mind, right? So that's the nature of attacks, and who the target of the attacks is likely going to change more and more towards these defenseless end users, right? And that's also an interesting one for us to keep in mind as we are, building systems and projecting into the future around security. So let me give you a few examples of some of these attacks, right, that happened in the recent past that we expect to see more of, right? Integrity, we talked about ghostware is a good way to summarize them, right? So these are attacks that affect some systems, maybe a change in a cell in an Excel sheet or in a database somewhere that goes unnoticed, right? So the attack on the SWIFT system, right, impacting Bank of Bangladesh, $100 million, right? So that went unnoticed for a long time, and the attackers were really, really, smart about covering their tracks, right? And that's just a start of what I would project would be a series of attacks that would subtly affect data integrity and hence change the decisions we make in the future, right? And this is where technologies like blockchain, they would go a long way in helping us not just know the audit trail and the integrity of data, but also sort of help create alerts when the data integrity is compromised. Right? So another class of attacks, right? So primarily around availability. We talked about this briefly, right? So the DINE DNS attack, right? So what happened in that example was they pretty much took over a good number of DVD players and security cameras around the world, right? Very simple attack, brilliant, right? So using default username and passwords that nobody changes. I didn't change my DVD player password. I didn't even know what it is, right? So they leveraged that, built a botnet, right? And at some point did a very coordinated attack against this DNS service, right? Affecting availability of many websites, right? So this is only going to go bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So there's lots and lots of connected devices, right? Gartner estimates about 20 billion by 2020, right? And so all of these are potential bots, right? And you don't have to be a savvy attacker to leverage these bots, right? All you need is Bitcoins, right? And I'm sure a lot of the folks in this room have, I'm curious, how many of you have Bitcoins or own Bitcoins of some kind? It's a much smaller percentage than I've thought. So Bitcoins are a good anonymous way to potentially, have access to some of these bots. And you can launch some very interesting personalized attacks on potentially a competitor or another service, right? So you don't have to be a savvy security expert who can sort of leverage and in fact take over these DVD players as bots. All you need is to know how to purchase a service using Bitcoins, right, and launch these attacks, right? So that's the next wave that we're thinking about, right? And in this case, right, the DINE identity aspect, so it's not that difficult. Most of us in this room, probably all of us, know how to manage identity, right? And we would, if you're building a new system, it would be very easy for us to change identity, right? So, but somebody manufacturing a DVD player, maybe that's not their strength, right? And so that's what it comes down to, right? How do we as security experts build new systems, build technology that'll help someone building these new systems, right? And we'll talk more about that in a second, right? So yet another example, another interesting one, right? So it's somewhere between availability and integrity. So it's ransomware, an extremely popular attack, right? So it grew by about 200% in 6 months, right? And I think Ajay briefly talked about this, right? A hospital in LA was impacted, right? They decided not to contact the FBI, decided to pay up. It was a small amount, 70K, right? And guess what? The bad guys saw a pattern, went after a whole bunch of hospitals, and I think about 12 plus hospitals were impacted by this attack, right? There's a few interesting lessons. One is that we are completely unprepared for attacks that impact our critical business systems, right? Both around availability, but also around collaborating on information, right? So the private sector has an implicit distrust, unfortunately, with the public sector, right? So, and a lot of us, unfortunately, do not want to collaborate with the FBI because it just comes with too much hassle, right? And if you have the trade-off between giving away a 50K to just get back and continue with your business versus interfacing with the FBI and collaborating over many months with an unknown process, you know what you would choose, right? So that's what's making this attack more and more popular, right? So, and it's an interesting attack more because it's playing on both availability and in some ways data integrity, right? So now what happens in this new world when integrity and availability are under attack, right? So how do we solve for this new world, right? So we need a new approach to establish trust, right? Not just between people, but also between people, users, machines, applications, services, right? All these different entities. Now, what we essentially need is a security fabric that we built as a community, right? So this fabric is essentially what someone like a DVD player manufacturer would use to bolt on security to their product from day zero, right? Not as an afterthought, right? They don't have to be security experts to sort of learn about identity or learn about how to do key management or encryption, but this is something that hopefully they can very easily employ to build new products so that they can focus on what they do best, build a DVD player, right? But at the same time, get the strong guarantees from a community like us who strengthens the security. But the key is to make this fabric and build this fabric in a fashion where it's invisible for the end users, but it's also invisible for the developers, the DVD player manufacturers, and in the software world, the implementers, and everybody involved, right? So that's where we play to our strengths, right? And we build all of these different elements that are part of this fabric, right? So it comes down to how do we build encryption and policy control that travels with the data, wherever the data goes, right? So how do we build techniques that using blockchain or others to protect data integrity? So how do we do context-aware intelligent trust, not just between people, but between all of these different kinds of entities, right? So how do we build systems that are available, that are resilient, right? That we can easily fall back to, right? And in a scalable fashion for someone who is not an expert in security. So that's what it comes down to, right? So how do we do this, right? So we come together as a community. It's about us working together, right? And building some basic building blocks around identity, around encryption, around key management, around we talked about blockchain, and building essentially a fabric that all of these application developers and product developers could use from day zero, not as an afterthought, right from the inception, so that they get the best of both worlds, right? They can focus their efforts on innovation, whereas leverage some of the things that this community can do well, right? So no vendor alone can do this, right? We don't want silos, right? We don't want two different services, each having their own encryption scheme that cannot talk to each other. That's not good for anyone. It just takes way too long. Eventually, right, enterprises or users would just completely get tired of it and wouldn't use it, right? And we have seen this game play out many times over the last few decades, right? So what we need is, think of it as standards, think of it as, we absorbing the complexity so that we, the product developers, the DVD player manufacturers, or the enterprise software developers have a really smooth experience, right? And are able to bolt security on top from day zero, from ground up, right? So that's I think what would be the best path forward, right? So in summary, security cannot be an afterthought, right? It has to be baked in from day zero, right? We don't want silos. We want these different systems that can interoperate, right? And this can be something that developers can easily bolt on top on any product or any service without they having to be security experts, right? And the only way we can do this is for us, the people in this room, to come together as a community and make it happen, right? And so, in short, that's what Versus has been all about, right? So we coming together and making security an enabler for innovation, not an inhibitor, but an enabler for innovation, right? So security is always thought of as a gate, a block, right? And I think it's all about changing that conversation from this is something that can help you get to your goal faster, right, in the long run, right, in a more cost-efficient fashion. So that would be a fantastic shift if you could make it happen in the next decade. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Prakash.